Dear friends, we are here today to discuss Indian news portal, The Wire's so-called investigation and retraction about a story that had made some very serious allegations about the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP in India, as well as the story that involved Meta, the company that owns Facebook. So joining us today are editors of the Australia Today, Dr. Amit Sarwal and Jitat Jay Bharadwaj. And we also have with us eminent Sydney-based academic Professor Salvatore Babones. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Amit, let me go straight to you. Can you tell us about what's exactly happened here?
Thanks, Pallavi. One of the key things that's happened here is that Wire has claimed that they did an investigation for a period of over 2 years into Bharatiya Janata Party's alleged links with Meta, where Meta has given them some special powers through an app called Tek Fog, where they can delete anyone's app without pre-approval of Meta. So the whole thing starts building up around October 6th, where they say that a story was published where a meme was deleted from Instagram. Then on October 10th, Wire claimed that Meta has given special privileges to Amit Malviya, who's the IT head of BJP, so IT cell basically. And then October 11, Wire published another story to top that with actual screenshots of what they claimed is our emails from Meta insiders, Andy Stone and some other people, some other cyber experts. And by October 15, this whole thing so built up that there were at least two newspapers or portals who have reprinted these stories in the West, particularly. And October 15, that story, which was published by The Wire, was authored by at least three people: Devesh Kumar, Janvi Sen, and Siddharth Vardarajan. Siddharth is obviously the head of The Wire founder, one of the founders. And they said that they are going to stand by these stories even after well-known academics, journalists, insiders into Facebook, even Meta people said that everything is a big dump of bullshit. There is no standing here. There is nothing. But still, The Wire went on. They even asked for, to keep on their fight going. They even asked for 30 lakhs rupees per month. It's available on the Twitter. They said, please donate generously. We are fighting injustice, all these things. And then finally, when people asked who was interacting with the sources at Meta, who was doing the checks, who was writing these stories, The Wire told that there was just one person doing everything. He was Devesh Kumar. And now the house of cards starts falling, and after initial internal reviews, The Wire surprisingly finds out that the story is bullshit, while everyone else, without even having an internal review, said these are, linguistics errors in the emails, the kind of language Americans won't use typically. And then finally, on Sunday, Wire actually retracted the Tek Fog investigation, or co-authored by particularly one other guy, Aishuman Kaul, who's also part of the Wire's IT team. So it was basically now Siddharth Vardarajan and some other editors at the Wire have thrown their IT people under the bus. They have said that these people were responsible for these alleged stories and the whole Meta coverage. We were waiting for this discussion to happen because, unlike some others, we do have journalistic and academic ethics, and we wanted to have the full picture in front of us. And we wanted to see one person whose image has been totally tarnished, which is Amit Malviya of BJP. What would he do? Remember that the Wire has just retracted its stories. It has not apologized to Amit Malviya and the Bharatiya Janata Party for this nonsense. And now Amit Malviya has decided, and he has tweeted recently that he has decided, after consulting with his lawyers, that he will file both civil and criminal case against The Wire, which is not a new thing for The Wire. Earlier, I think Bharat Biotech has filed one of the cases during COVID So it's the Wire to have fabricated news. Pallavi.
Yeah. And we also see this happening, that, the Wire would publish something, and then this is picked up by international media. Like, we have an opinion piece in the Washington Post, which makes a reference to this very case. And Professor Salvatore, you had written on this in one of the articles that you wrote
Right.
for our platforms, that how this news tends to get amplified, and because the editors, they kind of subjectively agree with what is being written, they don't do proper fact checking. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, this is the way the truth, and I put that in air quotes, this is the way the truth is manufactured. In fact, the Wire story got into the Washington Post via an opinion column. Rana Ayub, who is well known to Indians as a social activist, is a columnist as well for the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post puts her on the site with the tagline, not social activist, but the tagline journalist, which has a different implication. So she is a journalist writing an opinion article, but nonetheless identified by the Washington Post as a journalist, then said that there had been, and I'm quoting from the January article, a rigorous investigation by the Wire. So any ordinary American or Westerner, non-Indian, who has no idea who Rana Ayub is, who's just reading the Washington Post, sees a column by a journalist who is respected as a journalist by the Washington Post, who's writing in her column that there has been a rigorous investigation behind these allegations. Now, other news outlets, Bloomberg, for example, had simply reported these as allegations made by the Wire. And okay, fair enough. Then even then, allegations can become solidified into common wisdom. But in this case, we have more than that. We actually have a reader of the Washington Post, somebody 20 years from now, 200 years from now, going to the journalist archives, looking at the Washington Post, will simply find this article in the Washington Post. And if that person doesn't do further digging, this is now the truth about the story, even if the story has since been discredited. Now, sorry to talk at length, but you did say it had been retracted by the Wire. My understanding is that it has not yet even been retracted. It's simply been withdrawn from the website pending investigation. That's not an admission that the story is incorrect. That's an admission by the Wire that it needs further research. Now, we all know the story is incorrect. The Wire has in effect admitted it's incorrect, but without that explicit, so what should happen is the story should now be on the Wire as it was published, but with a disclaimer at the top. We now know this article to be false in big letters at the top of the article. Simply unpublishing the article doesn't undo the damage.
Yeah, and if we could say this, that would you at all consider that the Washington Post or others who have, in some way or the other published this or spoken about this, that they are going to, put up a piece, their opinion piece, clarifying to the readers that this is what has happened, this is the update. Jay, would like to get you in. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have worked with a few of the people who are into this story, and Rana Ayub used to be my colleague a long time back in India. I don't know how these people have converted themselves from journalists to kind of people who are so easily fabricating evidence and then claiming victim out of it. Somehow it looks to me a well-planned design to influence, as Sal is saying, to influence the people who don't actually know or can't be bothered to research into what's actually going on in India. And somebody I met at coffee shop, he told me that India is in big trouble. What's going on there? People are fighting with each other. I was like, how do you say that? He said, I read in XYZ newspaper. So New York Times is talking about this. I said, no, nothing like this is happening. He told me, I was planning to go in December, but I'm not going there just because something really nasty is happening in India. So who is giving that perception? Who will benefit from those perception? Amit has pointed out each time they do some fabricated story which draws emotions, which gets United Nations bodies or US or European NGOs to look at you and pity and say, all right, you people are being suffering, let's help these people. So for me, it's all about the agenda which is going on for last few years. And of course, there is one most important thing is a few people are making money out of it, and that's the bottom line of it. Pallavi?
Yeah, and Salvatore, as a person, who is looking at it from a very objective lens, from the outside, what do you make of this? I mean, you made the effort of doing research on the rankings and things like that. But if you were to just read a column, as a very normal person in the West, who just happens to read Washington Post and New York Times and others, what would you make of this?
Look, the problem here for India, and I speak as a friend of India, not as an Indian, the problem here for India is the credulity of the Western media. I mean, look, when I read something in The Wire, I know it's highly politicized, just as much as, frankly, if I read something in Op India, I know it's highly politicized, and I know to be skeptical with either of those sources. I mean, I'm skeptical with all sources, but I know to be especially skeptical with sources that are highly politicized. But Western editors tend to be very credulous when they read sources coming out of India, especially if they're coming from the class of people with whom they generally agree. So Rana Ayub, I mean, she shouldn't be taglined as a journalist. She's an activist. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a social activist. The world needs social activists in order to drive progress forward. And I think had she been treated by the Washington Post with kid gloves carefully as, well, we'll have occasionally a social activist write a piece of activist advocacy in our newspaper, well, then it wouldn't be such a problem. The problem is that because they agree with her activism and they don't agree with the activism of somebody who might be on the BJP side of Indian politics or on a regional party's side of Indian politics, because they agree with her activism, they have elevated her again in quote marks, from activist to journalist. By calling her a journalist, they're implying that she is doing objective research with no agenda behind it. And so when she then publishes a column in which she says there's been a rigorous investigation, she's the India expert from the perspective of the Washington Post. So they take that, again, credulously. They simply republish it. After all, she's their correspondent in a way in India. Then we create, as I said earlier, we manufacture a false truth. Because once it's in the Washington Post, for all practical purposes, it's citable. Wikipedia will take the citation. Any credible news organization around the world will take the citation. They'll say, well, it appears in an article in the Washington Post. Must be true.
Yeah. Salvatore, if I may add, as one academic to another academic, there was a time, and still there is a time, you mentioned about truth making and referencing and citing and sourcing, right? In academia, there was a time when professors, left-leaning professors in India would say, please cite these works and do not cite these people because they are not left academics, right? They do not belong to the cabal, basically. They do not belong to this. So this is how their truth gets circulated throughout the ages, 50 years, 70 years, 100 years, by particular universities. And this happens in America as well. I would take it, and Australia as well. But now, when people start questioning that, why should I reference this person and not this person, they say, you do not have the academic integrity, basically. They would say, you are not a professor, right? You must have been attacked too. Some people will say, he's not an academic. That's the basic thing. But when it comes to journalists like from The Wire or maybe Washington Post, New York Times, when we question their integrity as journalists, as fellow academics and journalists, they are pretty much shielded by an ecosystem which is there to destroy the truth. And yet they say that we stand for the truth.
Well, they're
Isn't
not
it?
the only ones. I mean, conservative academics and conservative journalists also selectively cite. The difference is there's so few conservative academics and journalists, and so many progressive academics and journalists, that it becomes an ecosystem that feeds on itself. It's a house built on its own foundation in a never-ending sort of loop of citations. But it does create a false sense of authority. That is, when you see Washington Post, Harvard University, for that matter, University of Sydney, where I work, when you see these bylines on things, for ordinary people, it of course becomes some kind of certification of objectivity, when really it shouldn't. People should be reading skeptically and making up their own minds.
Can I come in and ask you, Salvatore, what from here? Where do we go from here? I mean, once this is on the table, everyone to see, everyone to write and understand, where do we go from here?
Oh, you publicize it, right? There's no, I mean, this is what the magic of the internet. This is the wonderful fact that is live streaming, is that people increasingly get their news not just from established mainstream sources, but they get the news where they want to. And while that is often decried by many as the fragmentation of news media or the fragmentation of authority, everyone who says that wants to be considered an authority and doesn't want to consider other people as authorities. Well, it's very democratic, right? Social media is extremely democratic. Community media is extremely democratic. Organizations like the Australia Today, can go and do quality journalism and get it picked up on the web, regardless of whether they have the stamp of approval of a paper publication that's available on every street corner. And I think that's wonderful, and I think we can create counter narratives. Unfortunately, well, to steal a word, subaltern counter narratives. I mean, the real subalterns in India are the Hindus of India, right? The real subalterns are those who are pursuing their own truth, regardless of the dictates of a Western-oriented elite. And the internet makes it much more. It really facilitates their ability, and to some extent, to those of you who are involved in these movements, your ability to get the truth out.
Yeah, and I would like to add here that that there is one thing which is a wrong story coming out because of ignorance, or maybe a source giving the wrong information. But one really has to question and think that, is there a case here that you have a certain narrative to build, and you build a story around that, and sometimes sometimes maybe unintentionally, but sometimes even intentionally, there might be people, I'm not saying that there are, but there could be people who are propagating something that is incorrect, knowingly doing so, because the ecosystem supports that, and because the people who can challenge that fake narrative do not have that kind of power. So that is a very dangerous thing, in my opinion.
Well, but I mean, look, let's have a sense of perspective. The editors at The Wire got a story that they loved. Someone with supposed technical ability was getting them an inside story that they would love to hear. And so the fact that they were receptive to the story doesn't mean that they commissioned it. However, there is obviously a serious failure of oversight, especially when the story was so sensational as this one. A story this sensational should have been held back, double-checked, cross-referenced. It should have been thoroughly researched, as Rana Ayub said it was. Now, of course, we now know it wasn't thoroughly researched. The Wire has essentially admitted the story was not thoroughly researched. It wasn't cross-checked. Well, that's their editorial failure. But the editorial failure is simply because the story chimed so well with what they wanted to hear. And had they received a story that was not what they wanted to hear, they would have been much more skeptical and careful before publishing it.
One more thing is there, Amit, they have been hitting whatever BJP or right-wing academics or opinion makers in India. Wire has been writing a number of stories on that. That's okay. But it took a Meta, the Facebook's parent company, unless that story was published, nothing happened. Why it has to be a powerful Western body to for the action to be taken, or for people to realize that Wire is doing all those frauds for at least a number of years? I can see why it becomes only when it is the target is West, then only everyone realizes they are doing something wrong. If they are targeting us as Australia Today or anyone else in India, then everything okay, they are legitimate news channel or publication.
Salvatore, may I add with this? Jitat mentioned a really good thing, that the target is the West, be it for the consumption of the story. The consumption would obviously lead to prizes like Magsaysay or Pulitzer. That would be in their mind. This is a Pulitzer winning story investigation. Let's say 2 years investigation. And now we also know that there was nothing like 2 years. It was just everything. Even the dates have been fabricated in the emails. It's now a well-known fact. So either the target consumer was West, and also the target was a Western company, and that's why they fell in line. Basically, that's why they had to retract. They haven't apologized yet. Do you think that the brand, the Western stamp, is still very, very, very high on the colonial elitist mind?
Look, to some extent, forgive me, I think that's an unfair question. I mean, because we all know the answer to that, but honestly, that's why I'm here, right? I mean, I'm a professor at the University of Sydney, and so I think there's a general perception that, that I don't have a horse in this race, and so that my own opinion, it may be considered more objective than if you got a professor at an Indian university to do this interview instead. Sure. And so I think let's just be honest about that when thinking about ourselves. But obviously, there are massive resourcing differences between Western media and Indian media. There are massive resourcing differences between Western universities and Indian universities. And also, there's a prize. Someone like Rana Ayub gets far more credit and far more opportunities in the global stage because she writes for the Washington Post than for any writing she does in India. And so there is that prize for individuals to receive validation from rich Western institutions. I mean, look, let's never forget the simple fact that GDP per capita in the United States is 30 times what it is in India. I mean, I don't mean to damage Indians' pride. I just mean to state the simple fact that everyone knows that Indians are looking to get jobs with top U.S. companies so that they can get 30 times the salary, not just a little bit of a raise. Well, that's part of the structural fact of life in which Indian media has to operate. It's unfortunate. It's not fair. It's completely wrong. But it's a fact of life that we all know is there.
Yeah, but creating stories for Western consumption, that this is what the Westerns would like to hear about India. It's like making a Bollywood movie or a Hollywood movie, say Slumdog Millionaire. That's what the Westerns do.
I don't think it's for Western consumption. I strongly suspect it's for Indian consumption. That is, the story gets covered positively, endorsed by a Western institution, which then leads to it having greater credibility in India.
Yeah,
so the fact that the Washington...
I'll probably buy that from Salvatore. Exactly what is happening is something is being published in India, then it's republished or endorsed in West, then it will have a bigger impact on Indian audience. That's what he's saying. Now, my previous question, Salvatore, I'll go back to that. Why it takes a Meta to expose Wire? Why, if they are doing a hit piece on Indian institutions, why nobody's listening to that?
Oh, I'll leave that to the journalists here. I don't know how this case was uncovered, and I only read the final press reports. Pallavi, you tell us. Why it took Meta.
I mean, why those ears are not receptive when a Jai Bharadwaj or a Pallavi Jain is exposing them. When something, the target is Meta or Facebook or some other people, then those ears are more receptive. So that's another thing.
Well, it's only Meta who could tell us that this story was false. I mean, if Meta didn't or if Meta hadn't disconfirmed, I know you're the journalists, you tell me the proper language here, but we still wouldn't know it was false, is my understanding. That we only know it's false because the company told us it was false. Is that not correct?
No, I don't think so. Companies always say, I have been doing investigative stories, and companies always say this is not right, and we stick to the story. However, when the same thing was said by a number of institutions in India, that Wire is fabricating its story, the data is wrong, it doesn't match, the West was very happy to propagate it.
But absent a denial from, look, I just want to be fair and honest here. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know all the facts of the case, but my understanding is that absent an official denial from Facebook, we could never have absolute confirmation that this story was fabricated. We might suspect it, we might kind of know it inside, but as I understand it, that was the reveal. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I will add here something that is the point that we are making here, that no matter how credible, say, our research would be, or no matter how many times, say, the BJP might say that this is a false story or a fabricated story, the main point is that because Meta got involved, that's why the Wire has done what it has done. And I'm not sure whether media in the West is going to report on the Wire's retraction or suspension of the story in the same way that they would have propagated the initial story. But this is a cause, probably you could say, of concern, or it's a question really, that why is it that it takes a Meta, or some other Western institution or a company to highlight something, and if someone from India does it, or somebody of Indian origin does it, it's not taken at face value or with the same, it's not taken in the same way. I think that is the question that we often ask ourselves.
Well, people are very receptive to these kind of allegations. I mean, consider the Pegasus case, which is very similar in some ways, right? The allegation that the Indian government and other governments, but particularly the Indian government, has bought Israeli spy software in order to spy on its own citizens. Now, that resonates with a lot of critics, what they wish would be true of the Indian government. So, of course, they'd like to promote the story. They like to spread it. Will we ever know if it's true or not? Of course, the government denies it. If it were true, they would deny it. If it's false, they would deny it. We'll only ever know if Pegasus tells us, or if court documents reveal the truth. Now, I don't think there's anything neo-imperialist about Facebook being the one to disavow this Wire story. I mean, the story was about spying on Facebook, essentially, and we just can't know. Now, it is a problem that so much information is not in the public domain, and unless you can get your hands on this proprietary data, you can never get at the truth. That's an unfortunate fact in our data-driven world, but I don't think there's anything there, so to speak, other than the unfortunate fact that we needed Facebook to. Now, would that Facebook had immediately jumped in instead of waiting so long. But talk to Facebook about that.
In the last couple of years, we have seen, one of the discussion topics today is the alleged user's manual for anti-India propaganda. In the last 2 years, since the CAA protest and the farmers' protest, we saw that certain groups were using or sharing a toolkit, a Word document, or maybe some kind of hidden message, WhatsApp group, Telegram group, to send in kind of a toolkit, a basic roadmap of what to do in what kind of situations. Do you think this is just a conspiracy theory, or is there actual a user's manual for anti-India propaganda?
I'm sure there are multiple users' manuals circulating, but I would not view it as particularly anti-India. That is, these kind of tactics have been widespread in American and European social activism for a long time. Having a manual of everything from how to act on social media to the most extreme side, how to make bombs. And this sort of protest manuals have been circulating a long time. I'm not surprised that they have now started circulating in India, but it's I don't think it's anything that would be specifically anti-Indian. It's something that is just a fact of our postmodern lives.
Jitat, you want to add something?
I think we have had a really robust conversation today. Thank you, Salvatore, for joining us. Pallavi, Amit, Sarwal, thank you so much. And we'll be back with one more really mind-opening, I would say, conversation soon. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.